Hello everybody, good afternoon, konnichiwa desu. Welcome to another read-along stream, I suppose, here where we basically read, sorry about that, where we basically read along to a book. I'm your reader for today, Kamishiro Yoshiaki, and what I'm here to do is to sort of read books, because I don't read enough books in my own time. And what I'm hoping you're here is to just have a chill time and listen to me read some books. What? Not much else left to say, is there? I've got my tea with me, which I will be sipping from time to time. So it would be best if you get your own drink. Just put this on sound for now and grab a hot drink, settle down, we'll have a good time. Alright, let's get started. This is this book, as you can see down there, I'm reading a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. It's basically just time slip story, written by Mark Twain. In the turn of the century, long ago, before all the Japanese and Sword Art Online got popular. Alright, let's get started. I just said we're gonna have a good time, but we are gonna start with Chapter 12, Slow Torture. Straight off, we were in the country. It was most lovely and pleasant in those sylvan solitudes in early cool morning, in the first freshness of autumn. From hilltops, we saw fair green valleys lying spread out below, with streams winding through them, and island groves of trees here and there, and huge lonely oaks scattered about and casting black blots of shade. And beyond the valleys, we saw the ranges of hills, blue with haze, stretching away in billowy perspective to the horizon, with at wide intervals a dim fleck of white or gray on a wave summit, which we knew was a castle. We crossed broad natural lawns sparkling with dew, and we moved like spirits, the cushioned turf giving out no sound of footfall. We dreamed along through glades in a mist of green light that got its tint from the sun-drenched roof of leaves overhead, and by our feet the clearest and coldest of runlets went frisking and gossiping over its reefs and making a sort of whispering music, comfortable to hear. And at times, we left the world behind and entered into the solemn great deeps and rich gloom of the forest, where furtive wild things whisked and scurried by and were gone before you could even get your eye on the place where the noise was, and where only the earliest birds were turning out and getting to business with a song here and a quarrel yonder, and a mysterious far-off yammering and drumming for worms on a tree trunk away somewhere in the impenetrable remoteness of the woods. And by and out, we would swing again into the glare. About the third or fourth or fifth time that we swung out into the glare, it was along there somewhere, a couple of hours or so after sunup, it wasn't as pleasant as it had been. It was beginning to get hot. This was quite noticeable. We had a very long pull after that, without any shade. Now it is curious how progressively little frets grow and multiply after they once get a start. Things which I didn't mind at all at first I began to mind now, and more too, all the time. The first 10 or 15 miles, 15 times I wanted my handkerchief, I didn't seem to care. I got along and said never mind, it isn't any matter, and dropped it out of my mind. But now it was different. I wanted it all the time. It was nag, right along, and no rest. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And so at last I lost my temper and said, hang a man that would make a suit of armor without any pockets in it. You see, I had my handkerchief in my helmet, and some other things, but it was that kind of a helmet that you can't take off by yourself. That hadn't occurred to me when I put it there, and in fact I didn't know it. I supposed it would be particularly convenient there, and so now, the thought of its being there so handy and close by, and yet not gettable, made it all the worse and harder to bear. Yes, the thing that you can't get is the thing that you want mainly. Everyone has noticed that. Well, it took my mind off from everything else, took it clear off, and centered it in my helmet. And mile after mile, there it stayed, imagining the handkerchief, picturing the handkerchief. And it was bitter and aggravating to have the salt sweat keep trickling down into my eyes, and I couldn't get at it. It seemed like a little thing on paper, but it was not a little thing at all. It was the most real kind of misery. I would not say it if it were not so. I made up my mind that I would carry along a reticle next time, let it look how it might, and people say what they would. Of course, these iron dudes at the round table would think it was scandalous, and maybe raise shield about it, but as for me, give me comfort first, and style afterwards. So we jogged along, and now and then we struck a stretch of dust, and it would tumble up in clouds and get into my nose and make me sneeze and cry. And of course I said things I oughtn't to have said. I don't deny that. I'm not better than others. We couldn't seem to meet anybody in this lonesome Britain, not even an ogre. And in the mood I was in then, it was well enough for the ogre. That is, an ogre with a handkerchief. Most knights would have the thought of nothing but getting his armor, but so I got his bandana. He could keep his hardware for all of me. Meantime, it was getting hotter and hotter in there. You see, the sun was beating down and warming up the iron more and more all the time. Well, when you're hot, that way, every little thing irritates you. When I trotted, I rattled like a crate of dishes, and that annoyed me. And moreover, I couldn't seem to stand that shield slatting and banging, now about my breast, now about my back, and if I dropped into a walk, my joints creaked and screeched in that wearisome way that a wheelbarrow does. And as we didn't create any breeze at that gate, I was like to get fried in that stove. And besides, the quieter you went, the heavier the iron settled down on you, and the more and more tons you seemed to weigh every minute. And you had to always be changing hands and passing your spear over to the other foot. It got so irksome for one hand to hold it long at a time. Let's look at this. He's about to fall. もう落ちるんじゃないこれ And then she's leaning back for some reason. I don't know why. Well, you know, when you perspire that way in rivers, there comes a time when you itch. You're inside, your hands outside, so there you are, nothing but iron between. It is not a light thing, let it sound as it may. First it is one place, then another, and some more, and it goes on spreading and spreading, and at last the territory is all occupied, and nobody can imagine what you feel like, nor how unpleasant it is. And when it had got to the worst, and it seemed to me that I could not stand anything anymore, a fly got in through the bars and settled on my nose, and the bars were stuck and wouldn't work, and I couldn't get the visor up, and I could only shake my head, which was baking hot by this time, and the fly, you know how a fly acts when he has got certainty. He only minded the shaking enough to change from nose to lip, and lip to ear, and buzz, all around in there, and keep on lighting and biting in a way that a person already so distressed as I was simply could not stand. So I gave in, and I got Alessandre to unstrip the helmet and relieve me of it. Then she emptied the conveniences out of it and fetched it full of water, and I drank and then stood up, and she poured the rest down inside the armor. One cannot think how refreshing it was. She continued to fetch and pour until I was well soaked and thoroughly comfortable. He got the girl too. She's just pouring water down into his clothes. Oh my god, it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible. Never wear armor. Armor sounds like a terrible idea. Oh dear. Oh boy. Oh boy. It was good to have a rest and peace, but nothing is quite perfect in this life at any time. I had made a pipe a while back, and also some pretty fair tobacco. Not the real thing, but what came out of the what some of the Indians use, the inside bark of the willow, dried. These comforts had been in the helmet, and now I had them again, but no matches. Gradually, as the time wore along, one annoying fact was borne in upon my understanding, that we were weather-bound. An armed novice cannot mount his horse without help, and plenty of it. Sandy was not enough for me anyway. We had to wait until somebody should come along. Waiting in silence would have been agreeable enough, for I was full of matter for reflection and wanted to give it a chance to work. I wanted to try and think out how it was that rational or even half-rational men could ever have learned to wear armor, considering its inconveniences, and how they had managed to keep up such a fashion for generations when it was plain that what I had suffered today they had to suffer all the days of their lives. I wanted to think that out, and moreover, I wanted to think out some way to reform this evil and persuade the people to let the foolish fashion die out. But thinking was out of the question in the circumstances. You couldn't think where Sandy was. He's calling her Sandy now. She was quite a biddable creature and good-hearted, but she had a flow of talk that was as steady as a mill and made your head soar like the drays and wagons in a city. If she had had a cork, she would have been a comfort, but you can't cork that kind; they would die. Her clack was going all day, and you would think of something that would surely happen to her works by and by, but no, they never got out of order, and she never had to slack up for words. She could grind and pump and churn and buzz by the week, and never stop to oil up or blow out. And yet the result was just nothing but wind. She never had any ideas, any more than a fog has. She was a perfect blatherskite. I mean, for jaw, talk, jabber, but just as good as she could be. I hadn't minded her mill that morning, on account of having that hornet's nest of other troubles, but more than once in the afternoon I had to say, "Take a rest, child. The way you're using up all the domestic air, the kingdom will have to go importing it by tomorrow, and it's a low enough treasury without that." Chapter 13. Freemen. Yes, it is strange how little a while at a time a person can be contented. Only a little while back, when I was riding and suffering, what a heaven this peace, this rest, this sweet serenity in the secluded shady nook by this pearly stream would have seemed, where I could keep perfectly comfortable all the time by pouring a dipper of water into my armor now and then. Yet already I was getting dissatisfied, partly because I could not light my pipe, for, although I had long ago started a match factory, I had forgotten to bring matches with me, and partly because we had nothing to eat. It was another illustration of the childlike improvidence of this age and people. A man in armor always trusted to chance for his food on a journey, and would have been scandalized at the idea of bringing a basket of sandwiches on his spear. There was probably not a knight of all the Round Table combination who would not have rather died than been caught carrying such a thing as that on his flagstaff. And yet there could not be anything more sensible. It had been my intention to smuggle a couple of sandwiches into my helmet, but I was interrupted in the act, and I had to make an excuse and lay them aside, and a dog got them. Night approached, and with it a storm. The darkness came on fast. We must camp, of course. I found a good shelter for the demoiselle under a rock, and went off and found another for myself. But I was obliged to remain in my armor, because I could not get it off by myself, and yet could not allow Alessandre to help, because it would have seemed so like undressing before folk. It would not have amounted to that in reality, because I had clothes on underneath, but the prejudices of one's merely because it referred to them, and not because it insulted or offended them, for it didn't. Now, my bad. It would not have amounted to that in reality, because I had clothes on underneath, but the prejudices of one's breeding are not gotten rid of at just a jump, and I knew that when it came to stripping off that bob-tailed iron petticoat, I should be embarrassed. With the storm came a change of weather, and the stronger the wind blew, and the wider the rain lashed around, the colder and colder it got. Pretty soon, various kinds of bugs and ants and worms, and things began to flock in out of the wet and crawl down inside my armor to get warm. And while some of them behaved well enough and snuggled up against my clothes and got quiet, the majority were of a restless, uncomfortable sort, and never stayed still, but went on prowling and hunting for they did not know what. Especially the ants, which went tickling along in wearisome procession from one end of me to the other by the hour, and are a kind of creatures which I never wish to sleep with again. It would be my advice to persons situated in this way to not roll or thrash around, because this excites the interest of all the different sorts of animals and makes every last one of them want to turn out and see what is going on, and this makes things worse than they were before, and of course makes you objurgate harder too, if you can. Still, if one did not roll and thrash around, he would die, so perhaps it is as well to do one way as the other. There is no real choice. Even after I was frozen solid, I could still distinguish that tickling, just as a corpse does when he is taking electric treatment. I said I would never wear armor after this trip. All those trying hours whilst I was frozen, and yet was in a living fire, as you might say, on account of that swarm of crawlers, that same unanswerable question kept circling and circling through my tired head. How do people stand this miserable armor? How have they managed to stand it all these generations? How can they sleep at night for dreading the tortures of next day? When the morning came at last, I was in a bad enough plight. Seedy, drowsy, fagged from want of sleep, weary from thrashing around, famished from long fasting, pining for a bath, and to get rid of the animals, and crippled with rheumatism. And how had it fared with the nobly born, the titled aristocrat, the Demoiselle Alessandre de Carteloi? Why, she was as fresh as a squirrel. She had slept like the dead, and as for a bath, probably neither she nor any other noble in the land had ever had one, and so she was not missing it. Measured by modern standards, they were merely modified savages, those people. This noble lady showed no impatience to get to breakfast, and that smacks of the savage too. On their journeys, these Britons were used to long fasts and knew how to bear them, and also how to fight up against probable fasts before starting, and after the style of the Indian and the anaconda. As like as not, Sandy was loaded for a 3-day stretch. We were off before sunrise, Sandy riding and I limping along behind. In half an hour, we came upon a group of ragged poor creatures who had assembled to mend the thing which was regarded as a road. They were as humble as animals to me, and when I proposed to breakfast with them, they were so flattered, so overwhelmed by this extraordinary condescension of mine, that at first they were not able to believe that I was in earnest. My lady put up her scornful lip and withdrew to one side. She said in their hearing that she would as soon think of eating with the other cattle, a remark which embarrassed these poor devils merely because it referred to them, and not because it insulted or offended them, for it didn't. And yet they were not slaves, not chattels. By a sarcasm of law and phrase, they were freemen. 7/10 of the free population of the country were of just their class and degree, small independent farmers, artisans, etc., which is to say, they were the nation, the actual nation. They were about all of it that was useful or worth saving or really respect-worthy. And to subtract them would have been to subtract the nation and leave behind some dregs, some refuse in the shape of king, nobility, and gentry, idle, unproductive, acquainted mainly with the arts of wasting and destroying, and of no sort of use or value in any rationally constructed world. And yet, by ingenious contrivance, this gilded minority, instead of being in the tail of the procession where it belonged, was marching head up and banners flying at the other end of it, had elected itself to be the nation, and these innumerable clams had permitted it, as long as they had come at last to accept it as a truth, and not only that, but to believe it was right, and as it should be. The priests had told their fathers and themselves that this ironical state of things was ordained of God, and so, not reflecting upon how unlike God it would be to amuse himself with sarcasms, and especially such poor transparent ones as these, They had dropped the matter there and become respectfully quiet. The talk of these meek people had a strange enough sound in a formerly American ear. They were freemen, but they could not leave the estates of the Lord or their bishop without his permission. They could not prepare their own bread, but must have their corn ground and the bread baked at his mill and his bakery, and pay roundly for the same. They could not sell a piece of their own property without paying him a handsome percentage of the proceeds, nor buy a piece of somebody else's without remembering him in cash for the privilege. They had to harvest his grain for him gratis, and be ready to come at a moment's notice, leaving their own crop to destruction by the threatened storm. They had to let him plant fruit trees in their fields, and then keep their indignation to themselves when his heedless fruit gatherers trampled the grain around the trees. They had to smother the anger when his hunting parties galloped through their fields, laying waste the result of their patient toil. They were not allowed to keep doves themselves, and when the swarms from my lord's dovecote settled on their crops, they must not lose their temper and kill a bird, for awful would the penalty be. When the harvest was at last gathered, then came the procession of robbers to levy their blackmail upon it. First the church carted off its fat 10th, then the king's commissioner took his 20th, then my lord's people made a mighty inroad upon the remainder, after which the skinned freeman had liberty to bestow the remnant in his barn, in case it was worth the trouble. There were taxes, and taxes, and taxes, and more taxes, and taxes again, and yet other taxes, upon this free and independent pauper, but none upon his lord, the baron, or the bishop, none upon the wasteful nobility or the all-devouring church. If the baron would sleep unvexed, the freeman must sit up all night after his day's work and whip the pawns to keep the frogs quiet. If the freeman's daughter, but no, that last infamy of monarchical government is unprintable. And finally, if the freeman, grown desperate with his tortures, found his life unendurable under such conditions, and sacrificed it and fled to death for mercy and refuge, the gentle church condemned him to eternal fire, for the gentle law buried him at midnight at the crossroads with a stake through his back, and his master the baron or the bishop confiscated all his property and turned his widow and his orphans out of doors. And here were these freemen, assembled in the early morning to work on their lord the bishop's road, 3 days each, gratis, every head of a family and every son of a family, 3 days each, gratis, and a day or so added for their servants. Why, it was like reading about France and the French, before the ever-memorable and blessed revolution, which swept 1,000 years of such villainy away in one swift tidal wave of blood. A settlement of that hoary debt in a proportion of half a drop of blood for each hogshead of it that had been pressed by slow tortures out of that people in a weary stretch of 10 centuries of wrong and shame and misery, the like of which was never to be mated but in hell. There were 2 reigns of terror, if we would but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak. Where is the horror of swift death by the axe, compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? What is swift death by lightning compared with death by slow fire at the stake? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over. But all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror which none of us has been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. These poor ostensible freemen who were sharing the breakfast and their talk with me were as full of humble reverence for the king and church and nobility as their worst enemy could desire. There was something pitifully ludicrous about it. I asked them if they supposed a nation of people ever existed who, with a free vote in every man's hand, would elect that a single family and its descendants should reign over it forever, whether gifted or boobies, to the exclusion of all other families, including the voters, and would also elect that a certain 100 families should be raised to dizzy summits of rank and clothed down with offensive transmissible glories and privileges to the exclusion of the rest of the nation's families, including his own. They all looked unhit and said they didn't know, that they had never thought about it before, and it hadn't ever occurred to them that a nation could be so situated that every man could have a say in the government. I said I had seen one, and that it would last until it had an established church. Again, they were all unhit at first. But presently, one man looked up and asked me to state that proposition again, and state it slowly, so it could soak into his understanding. I did it, and after a little, he had the idea, and he brought his fist down, and said he didn't believe a nation where every man had a vote could voluntarily get down in the mud and dirt in any such way, and that to steal from a nation its will and preference must be a crime and the first of all crimes. I said to myself, this one's a man. If I were backed by enough of his sort, I would make a strike for the welfare of this country, and try to prove myself its loyalist citizen by making a wholesome change in its system of government. You see, my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or to its office holders. The country is the real thing, the substantial thing, the eternal thing. It is the thing to watch over and care for and be loyal to. Institutions are extraneous. They are its mere clothing, and clothing can wear out, become ragged, cease to be comfortable, cease to protect the body from winter, disease, and death. To be loyal to rags, to shout for rags, to worship rags, to die for rags, that is a loyalty of unreason. It is pure animal. It belongs to monarchy, was invented by monarchy, let monarchy keep it. I was from Connecticut, whose constitution declares that all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit, and that they have at all times an undeniable and indefeasible right to alter their form of government in such a manner as they may think expedient. Under that gospel, the citizen who thinks he sees that the Commonwealth's political clothes are worn out, and yet holds his peace and does not agitate for a new suit, is disloyal. He is a traitor. That he may be the only one who thinks he sees this decay does not excuse him. It is his duty to agitate anyway, and it is the duty of the others to vote him down if they do not see the matter as he does. And now here I was, in a country where a right to say how the country should be governed was restricted to six persons and each 1,000 of its population. For the 994 to express dissatisfaction with the regnant system and propose to change it would have made the whole six shudder as one man. It would have been so disloyal, so dishonorable, such putrid black treason. So to speak, I was becoming a stockholder in a corporation where 994 of the members furnished all the money and did all the work, and the other 6 elected themselves a permanent board of direction and took all the dividends. It seemed to me that what the 994 dupes needed was the New Deal. The thing that would have best suited the circus side of my nature would have been to resign the bossship and get up an insurrection and turn it into a revolution. But I knew that the Jack Cade or the Watt Tyler who would try such a thing without first educating his materials up to revolution grade is almost absolutely certain to get left. I had never been accustomed to getting left, even if I do say it myself. Wherefore, the deal, which had been for some time working into shape in my mind, was of a quite different pattern from the Cade-Tyler sort. So I did not talk blood and insurrection to that man there who sat munching black bread with that abused and mistaught herd of human sheep, but took him aside and talked matter of another sort to him. After I had finished, I got him to lend me a little ink from his veins, and with this and a sliver I wrote on a piece of bark, put him in the man factory, and give it to him, and said, "Take it to the palace at Camelot, and give it into the hands of Amias le Poulet, whom I call Clarence, and he will understand." 違うのかよ。Clarence's name isn't Clarence? It's Amias. Amias. Clarence じゃないの. He's not Clarence. Oh my God. "He's the priest, then," said the man, and some of the enthusiasm went out of his face. "How? A priest? Didn't I tell you that no chattel of the church, no bond slave of pope or bishop can enter my man factory? Didn't I tell you that you couldn't enter unless your religion, whatever it might be, was your own free property?" "Married, it is so, and for that I was glad. Wherefore it liked me not, and bred in me a cold doubt, to hear of this priest being there." "But he isn't a priest, I tell you." The man looked far from satisfied. He said, He is not a priest, and yet can read." "He's not a priest, and yet can read. Yes, and write, too, for that matter. I taught him myself." The man's face cleared. "And it is the first thing that you yourself will be taught in that factory." I would not give up blood out of my heart to know that art. Why, I will be your slave, No, you won't. You won't be anybody's slave. Take your family and go along. Your lord the bishop will confiscate your small property, but no matter. Clarence will fix you all right." Chapter 14. "Defend thee, Lord." I paid 3 pennies for my breakfast, and a most extravagant price it was too, seeing that one could have breakfasted a dozen persons for that money. But I was feeling good by this time, and I had always been a kind of a spendthrift anyway. And then these people had wanted to give me the food for nothing, scant as their provision was, and so it was a grateful pleasure to emphasize my appreciation and sincere thankfulness with a good big financial lift, where the money would do so much more good than it would in my helmet. Where, these pennies being made of iron and not stinted in weight, my $50 worth was a good deal of a burden to me. I spent money rather too freely in those days, it is true. But one reason for it was that I hadn't got the proportion of things entirely adjusted, even yet, after so long a sojourn in Britain. Hadn't got along to where I was able to absolutely realize that a penny in Arthur's Land and a couple of dollars in Connecticut were about one and the same thing, just twins, as you may say, in purchasing power. If my start from Camelot could have been delayed a very few days, I could have paid these people in beautiful new coins from our own mint, and that would have pleased me, and them too. No, not less. I had adopted the American values exclusively. In a week or two now, cents, nickels, dimes, quarters, and $50, and also a trifle of gold, would be trickling in thin but steady streams all through the commercial veins of the kingdom, and I looked to see this new blood freshen up its life. The farmers were bound to throw in something to sort of offset my liberality, whether I would or no, so I let them give me a flint and steel, and as soon as they had comfortably bestowed Sandy and me on our horse, I lit my pipe. When the first blast of smoke shot through the bars of my helmet, all those people broke for the woods, and Sandy went over backwards and struck the ground with a dull thud. They thought I was one of those fire-belching dragons they had heard so much about from knights and other professional liars. I had infinite trouble to persuade these people to venture back within explaining distance. Then I told them that this was only a bit of enchantment, which would work harm to none but my enemies. And I promised, with my hand on my heart, that if all who felt no enmity toward me would come forward and pass before me, they should see that only those who remained behind would be struck dead. The procession moved with a good deal of promptness. There were no casualties to report, for nobody had curiosity enough to remain behind to see what would happen. Effect of the pipe. Run away! He's a dragon! The Fifth Dragon. Dragon! I lost some time now, for these big children, their fears gone, became so ravished with wonder over my all-compelling fireworks that I had to stay there and smoke a couple of pipes out before they would let me go. Still, the delay was not wholly unproductive, for it took all that time to get Sandy thoroughly wanted to the new thing, she being so close to it, It plugged up her conversation mill, too, for a considerable while, and that was a gain. But above all other benefits accruing, I had learned something. I was ready for any giant or any ogre that might come along now. We tarried with a holy hermit that night, and my opportunity came about the middle of the next afternoon. We were crossing a vast meadow by way of a shortcut, and I was musing absently, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, when Sandy suddenly interrupted a remark which she had begun that morning, with the cry, "Defend thee, Lord! Peril of life is toward!" And she slipped down from the horse and ran a little way and stood. I looked up and saw, far off in the shade of a tree, half a dozen armed knights and their squires, and straightway there was bustle among them, and tightening of saddle girths for the mount. My pipe was ready and would have been lit, if I had not been lost in thinking about how to banish oppression from this land, and restore to all its people their stolen rights and manhood without disobliging anybody. I lit up at once, and by the time I had got a good head of reserved steam on, here they came. All together, too. None of these chivalrous magnanimities which one reads so much about, one courtly rascal at a time, and the rest standing by to see fair play. No! They came in a body. They came with a whirl and a rush. They came like a volley from a battery. Came with heads low down, plumes streaming out behind, lances advanced at a level. It was a handsome sight, a beautiful sight, for a man up a tree. I laid my lance in rest and waited, with my heart beating, until the iron wave was just ready to break over me, then spouted a column of white smoke through the bars of my helmet. You should have seen the way the wave go to pieces and scatter. This was a finer sight than the other one. But these people stopped, 200 or 300 yards away, and this troubled me. My satisfaction collapsed, and fear came. I judged I was a lost man. But Sandy was radiant, and was going to be eloquent, but I stopped her, and told her my magic had miscarried, somehow or other, and she must mount with all dispatch, and we must ride for life. No, she wouldn't. She said my enchantment had disabled those knights. They were not riding on because they couldn't. Wait, they would drop out of their saddles presently, and we would get their horses and harness. I could not deceive such trusting simplicity, so I said it was a mistake, that when my fireworks killed at all, they killed instantly. No, the men would not die. There was something wrong about my apparatus. I couldn't tell what. But we must hurry and get away, for those people would attack us again in a minute. Sandy laughed and said, "Lack-a-day, sir, they be not of that breed. Sir Launcelot will give battle to dragons, and will abide by them, and will assail them again, and yet again, and still again, until he do conquer and destroy them. And so likewise will Sir Pellinore, and Sir Aglovale, and Sir Carados, and mayhap others, but there be none else that will venture it. Let the idle say what the idle will. And la, as to yonder base rufflers, think ye they have not their fill, but yet desire more? Well then, what are they waiting for? Why don't they leave? Nobody's hindering. Good land, I'm not willing to let bygones be bygones, I'm sure." Leave? Leave, is it? Oh, give thyself easement as to that. They dream not of it, no, not they. They wait to yield them. Come, really, is that sooth, as you people say? If they want to, why don't they? It would like them much, but an ye wot how dragons are esteemed, ye would not hold them blamable. They fear to come. Well, then, I suppose I go to them instead, and wit ye well they will not abide your coming. I will go. And she did. She was a handy person to have along on a raid. I would have considered this a doubtful errand myself. I presently saw the knights riding away, and Sandy coming back. That was a relief. I judged she had somehow failed to get the first innings. In the conversation. Otherwise, the interview wouldn't have been so short. But it turned out that she had managed the business well. In fact, admirably. She said that when she told these people I was the boss, it hit them where they lived, smote them sore with fear and dread, was her word. And then they were ready to put up with anything she might require. So she swore them to appear at Arthur's court within 2 days, and yield them with horse and harness, and be my knights henceforth, and subject to my command. How much better she managed that thing than I should have done it myself. She was a daisy. Chapter 15. Sandy's Tale. And so I'm a proprietor of some knights, said I, as we rode off. Who would ever have supposed that I should live to list up assets of that sort? I shan't know what to do with them, unless I rattle them off. How many of them are there, Sandy? 7, please you, sir, and their squires. It is a good haul. Who are they? Where do they hang out? Where do they hang out? Yes, where do they live? Ah, I understand thee not. That will I tell eftsoons. Then she said musingly and softly, turning the words daintily over her tongue. Hang they out. Where do they hang out? Right so. Where do they hang out? Of a truth, the phrase hath a fair and winsome grace, and is prettily worded without. I will repeat it anon and anon in mine idlesse, whereby I may peradventure learn it. Where do they hang out? Even so, already it falleth triply from my tongue, and for as much as don't forget the cowboys, Sandy. Cowboys? Yes, not knights, you know. They were going to tell me about them. A while back, you remember? Figuratively speaking, game's called. Game. Yes. Go to the bat. Get to work on your statistics, and don't burn so much kindling getting your fire started. Tell me about the knights. I will, well, and lightly will begin. So they too departed, and rode into a great forest, and great Scott! You see, I recognized my mistake at once. I had set her works a-going, and it was my own fault. She would be 30 days getting down to those facts, and she generally began without a preface and finished without a result. If you interrupted her, she would either go right along without noticing, or answering with a couple of words and go right back and say the sentence over again. So, interruptions only did harm, and yet I had to interrupt pretty frequently too, in order to save my life. A person would die if he let her monotony drip on him right along all day. Great Scott! I said in my distress. She went right back and began over again. So they too departed and rode into a great forest. And which two? Sir Gawain and Sir Uwaine. And so they came to an abbey of monks, and they were well lodged. And so on the morn they heard the masses in the abbey, and so they rode forth until they came to a great forest. Then was Sir Gawain where in a valley by a turret of 12 fair damsels, and 2 knights armed on great horses, and the damsels went to and fro by a tree. And then was Sir Gawain where how there hung a white shield on that tree, and ever as the damsels came by it, they spit upon it, and some threw mire upon the shield. Now, if I hadn't seen the like myself in this country, Sandy, I would not believe it. But I've seen it, and I can just see these creatures now parading before that shield and acting like that. The women here do certainly act all possessed. Yes, and I mean your best too, society's very choicest brands. The humble hello girl along 10,000 miles of wire could teach gentleness, patience, modesty, manners to the highest duchess in Arthur's land. Hello girl? Yes, but don't you ask me to explain. It's a new kind of girl. They don't have them here. One often speaks sharply to them when they are not the least in fault, and he can't get over feeling sorry for it and ashamed of himself in 1300 years. It's such jabby, mean conduct and so unprovoked. Fact is, no gentleman ever does it, though I myself, if I've got to confess, peradventure she... Never mind her. I tell you, I wouldn't ever explain her so you would understand. Even so be it, since you are so minded. And then Sir Gawain and Sir Wayne went and saluted them, and asked them why they did that despite to the shield. Sir, said the damsels, we will tell you. There is a knight in this country that owneth this white shield, and he is a passing good man of his hands, but he hateth all ladies and gentlewomen, and therefore we do all this despite to the shield. I will say to you, said Sir Gawain, it beseemeth evil a good knight to despise all ladies and gentlewomen, and peradventure, though he hate you, he hath some cause, and peradventure he loveth in some other places ladies and gentlewomen, and to be loved again, and he is such a man of prowess as you may speak. Man of prowess, yes, that's a man to please them, Sandy. Man of brains, that's a thing they never think of. Tom Sayers, John Heaton, John L. Sullivan. Pity you could be here. You would have your legs under the round table and a sir right in front of your names within the 24 hours, and you could bring about a new distribution of the married princesses and duchess of the court in another 24. The fact is, it is just a sort of polished up court of Comanches, and there isn't a squaw in it who doesn't stand ready at the dropping of a hat to desert to the buck with the biggest string of scalps at his belt. And he be such a man of prowess as you speak of, said Sir Gawain. Now, what is his name? Sir, they said, his name is Morehouse, the king's son of Ireland. Son of the king of Ireland, you mean? The other form doesn't mean anything. And look out and hold on tight. Now, we must jump this gully. There, we are all right now. This horse belongs in the circus. He is born before his time. His name is Morehouse, the king's son of Ireland. The king's son of Ireland. Son of the king of Ireland. Lol. I know him well, said Sir Wayne. He is a passing good knight as any is on live. On live. If you've got a fault in the world, Sandy, it is that you are a shade too archaic. But it isn't any matter. For I saw him once prove at a justs where many knights were gathered, and that time there might be no man withstand him. Ah, said Sir Gawain, damsels, methinketh ye are to blame, for it is to suppose he that hung that shield there would not be long there form, and then made those knights match him on horseback, and that is more your worship than thus, for I will abide no longer to see a knight's shield dishonored. And therewith Sir Gawain and Sir Wayne departed a little from them, and then where they were, Sir Morehouse came riding along on a great horse straight toward them. And when the 12 damsels saw Sir Morehouse, they fled into the turret as they were wild, so that some of them fell by the way. And then one of the knights of the tower dressed his shield, and said on high, Sir Morehouse, defend thee. And so they ran together that the knight brake his spear on Morehouse, and Sir Morehouse smote him so hard that he brake his neck, and the horse's back. Well, that's just the trouble with this state of things, it ruins so many great horses. Then saw the other knight of the turret, and dressed him toward Morehouse, and they went so eagerly together that the knight of the turret was soon smitten down, horse and man, stark dead, another horse gone. I tell you, it's a custom that ought to be broken up. I don't see how people with any feeling can applaud or support it. So these two knights came together with great random... I saw that I had been asleep and missed a chapter, but I didn't say anything. I judged that the Irish knight was in trouble with the visitors by this time, and this turned out to be the case. And Sir Wayne smote Sir Morehouse, that his spear brast in pieces on the shield, and Sir Morehouse smote him so sore that horse and man he bare to the earth, and hurt Sir Wayne on the left side. The truth is, Alessandro, these archaics are a little too simple. The vocabulary is too limited, and so by consequence, descriptions suffer in the matter of variety. They run too much to level Saharas of fact, and not enough to picturesque detail. This throws about them a certain air of the monotonous. In fact, the fights are all alike. A couple of people come together with great random is a good word, and so is exegesis, for that matter, and so is Holocaust, and whoa, and defalcation, and usufruct, and 100 others. But land, a body ought to discriminate. They come together with great random, right? And the spear is brast, and one party break his shield, and other goes down, horse and man, over his shield, over his horse tail, and break his neck. And then the next candidate comes randoming in and brast his spear, and the other man brast his shield, and down he goes, horse and man, over his horse tail, and break his neck. And then there's another elected, and another, and still another, till the materials are used up. And when you come to figure up results, you can't tell one fight from another, nor who whipped. And as a picture of living, raging, warring battle show, why, it's pale and noiseless, just ghosts scuffling in the fog. Dear me, what would this barren vocabulary get out of the mightiest spectacle? The burning of Rome in Nero's time, for instance. Why, it would merely say, town burned down, no entrance, boy brast the window, fireman brack his neck. Why, that ain't a picture. It was a good deal of a lecture, I thought, but it didn't disturb Sandy, didn't turn a feather, or steam soared steadily up again the minute I took off the lid. Then Sir Morehouse turned his horse and rode towards Gawain with his spear, and when Sir Gawain saw that, he dressed his shield, and then they adventured their spears, and they came together with all the might of their horses, that either knight smote other so hard in the midst of their shields, but Sir Gawain's spear brake, I knew it would, but Sir Marhouse's spear held, and therewith Sir Gawain and his horse rushed down to the earth, just so, and brake his back. And lightly Sir Gawain rose upon his feet, and put out his sword, and dressed him towards Sir Morehouse on foot, and therewith either came unto other eagerly, and smote together with their swords, that their shields flew and cantles, and they bruised their helms and their hauberks, and wounded either other. But Sir Gawain, fro it past 9 of the clock, waxed by the space of 3 hours ever stronger and stronger, and thrice his might was increased. All this espied Sir Morehouse, and had great wonder how his might increased. And so they wounded Arthur passing sore, and when it was come noon, the pelting sing-song of it carried me forward to scenes and sounds of my boyhood days. Near hen! 10 minutes for refreshments. Conductor strike the gong about 2 minutes before train leaves. Passengers for the shoreline, please stick seats in the rear car. This car doesn't go no further. Please. Orange, bananas, sandwiches, popcorn. And waxed past noon and drew toward evensong. Sir Gawain's strength feebled and waxed passing faint, that unneth he might endure any longer, and Sir Morehouse was then bigger and bigger, which strained his armor, of course, right? And yet little would one of these people mind such a small thing like that. And so, Sir Knight, said Sir Morehouse, I have well felt that you are a passing good knight, and a marvellous man of might as ever I felt any, and while it lasted, and our quarrels are not great, and therefore it were a pity to do you hurt, for I feel you are passing feeble. Said Sir Gawain, gentle knight, ye say the word that I should say. And therewith they took off their helms, and either kissed the other, and there they swore together either to love other as brethren. But I lost the thread there, and dozed off to slumber, thinking about what a pity it was that men with such superb strength enabling them to stand up cased in cruelly burdensome iron and drenched with perspiration, and hack and batter and bang each other for 6 hours on a stretch, should not have been born at a time when they could put it to some useful purpose. Take a jackass, for example. A jackass has that kind of strength, and puts it to a useful purpose, and is valuable to this world because he is a jackass. But a nobleman is not valuable because he is a jackass. It is a mixture that is always ineffectual, and should never have been attempted in the first place. And yet, once you start a mistake, the trouble is gone. You never know what is going to come of it. When I came to myself again and began to listen, I perceived that I had lost another chapter, and that Alessandre had wandered a long way off with her people. And so they rode and came into a deep valley full of stones, and therefore they saw a fair stream of water. Above thereby was the head of the stream, a fair fountain, and 3 damsels sitting thereby. In this country, said Sir Morehouse, came never knight since it was christened, but he found strange adventures. That is not good form, Alessandre. Sir Morehouse, the king's son of Ireland, talks like all the rest. You ought to give him a brogue, or at least a characteristic spliff. By this means one would recognize him as soon as he spoke, without his ever being named. It is a common literary device with the great authors. You should make him say, in this country, be jabbers, came never knight, since it was christened, but he found such strange adventures, be jabbers. You see how much better that sounds. Came never knight, but he found strange adventures, be jabbers. Of a truth, it doth indeed, fair lord, albeit it's passing hard to say, though peradventure thou wilt not tarry, but better speed with usage. And then they rode to the damsels, and either saluted other, and the eldest had a garland of gold upon her head, and she was 60 winter of age or more. The damsel was? Even so, dear lord, and her hair was white under the garland. Celluloid teeth, $9 a set, as like as not. The loose fit kind that can go up and down like a portcullis when you eat, and fall out when you laugh. The second damsel was of 30 winter of age, with a circlet of gold above her head. The third damsel was but 15 years of age. Billows of thought came rolling over my soul, and the voice faded out of my hearing. 15! Break, oh my heart! Oh my lost darling! Just her age who was so gentle and lovely and all the world to me, and whom I shall never see again. How the thought of her carries me back over wide seas of memory to a vague, dim time, a happy time, so many, many centuries hence, when I used to wake in the soft summer mornings out of sweet dreams of her and say, "Hello, Central," just to hear her dear voice come melting back to me with a "Hello, Hank," and that was music of the spheres to my enchanted ear. She got $3 a week, but she was worth it. I could not follow Alessandre's further explanation of who our captured knights were now. I mean, in case she should ever get to explaining who they were. My interest was gone, my thoughts were far away, and sad. By fitful glimpses of the drifting tale, caught here and there, and now and then again, I merely noted in a vague way that each of these 3 knights took one of these 3 damsels up behind him on his horse, and one rode north, another east, the other south, to seek adventurers, and meet again and lie after year and day. Year and day, and without baggage, is of a piece with the general simplicity of the country. The sun was now setting. It was about 3 in the afternoon when Alessandre had begun to tell me who the cowboys were, and so she had made pretty good progress with it for her. She would arrive sometime or other, no doubt, but she was not a person who could be hurried. We were approaching a castle which stood on high ground, a strong, huge, venerable structure, whose great towers and battlements were charmingly draped with ivy, and whose whole majestic mass was drenched with splendors flung from the sinking sun. It was the largest castle we had seen, and so I thought it might be the one we were after, but Sandy said no. She did not know who owned it. She said she had passed it without calling when she went down to Camelot. Ooh, next chapter, Morgan Le Fay. Alright, that is it for today. So we basically learned that Sandy speaks like tons. She just goes on and on and on and on with her lies. And then we learned that armor sucks, never wear armor, right? And that people of this time are afraid of pipes. Sounds like good progress. Next time, it's Morgan Le Fay, the witch. Well, that should be fun. I will see.